Well, I think we're going to get started. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Some of you have been because he's come without a ticket, but that's okay. That's entrepreneurial spirit. So it's absolute pleasure to have, as most of you will know, this happened on Wednesday. Unfortunately, it didn't, but we were really delighted that Joe managed to reschedule. So to be here today, I'm obviously not going to introduce Joe other than saying we're very, very pleased to have you. Everybody know Joe. The one thing I will say is we have a tradition, which is if you ask a good question. So I think Joe's you're going to talk about 45 minutes, and then we have 15-minute Q&A, okay. Something like that. If you ask a bad question, you get a copy of my book. Be very careful. If you ask a good question, we have signed copies of Joe's book across time. So and I'm going to try to keep a record. So having said that, absolute pleasure to have you here at the Business School, Joe. Come on up, and I'll put your slides on. And I have to say we did.
Okay, it's a real pleasure to be here. This is a joint work with Verano, who's with Tomohiro Verano, who's been working with me for several years at Columbia, when he's at the University of Tokyo, and now he's been phase of management down London. And this is the origin of this work is a concern that land speculation, real estate speculation more broadly, can give rise to instability and crowd out productive investment. And so we're going to try, in a very limited amount of time, go through two models, one which focuses on instability and one that focuses on the crowding out role. Crowding out role plays a part in the both. And it gives a very different flavor. Some of you may know, if you're doing a PhD, on one of the standard sets of models, Kiyotaki and Moore, have collateral supporting entrepreneurship, and an increase in the value of collateral results in some sense in an increase in entrepreneurship. And one of the main results that we're going to get is that that's wrong in general, and that the main effect of an increase in collateral is that it increases the crowding out effect of land. People hold land rather than productive capital, and that's actually negative for economic growth. So the work we're going to describe, overturns a number of standard propositions in economics. The fact is that real estate bubbles have played a very big role. I can't see what's behind me, but tell me if I get out of sync. I have it written down. Usually they have a big monitor there, but and this is a business school, I tell you. A lot of our fluctuations have been real estate fluctuations. The 2008 crisis was the most recent example. And in many ways, a lot of these ideas can be extended to broader areas. I should say one more thing, that both of the models that we're going to talk about are very stylized, and part of the thing that so this is in many ways an exercise in pure theory, but it should be, we hope, clear that these ideas can be extended in much more realistic models and settings with very similar results. So the basic model that we're using is a standard overlapping generations model with rational expectations. I should say, we don't believe in rational expectations. I think it's an absurd idea, and I'm ranted about it on many other places, but what we wanted to do in this paper is to show that just changing one or two of the standard assumptions really overturned all the results. So it's we wanted to make clear how fragile any of you who again have had to suffer through representative aging, DSGE models or anything like that. I hope you haven't wasted your time on that. But I suspect some of you may have had to waste your time on these models. What I hope this will convince you that you did in fact waste your time. That just changing one assumption or two assumptions totally changes the result. The first assumption is that individuals live a finite life. Now, we don't in our paper cite any empirical literature on that. We couldn't find any regressions that supported the view that people have finite lives. But especially I feel as I approach that transversality condition, that life is finite. And so I think there are good reasons to say this is a better assumption than say people live infinitely long. And the second assumption is that there is a store of value which may or may not be productive, but is not produced itself. And this is land. In other variants of the model could be money, but we're going to talk about land. And one version, we'll talk about most land is unproductive, but all the results go through it in a quite interesting way when land is productive. So those are really the only differences with a standard model. Now, if people live a finite life, then you have to have a sequence of people, and that's the standard overlapping generations model. And we're going to use the standard version, which is people live for 2 periods, work in the first period, or retired in the second period, and they save during their first period for their retirement. And the key insight in the first part of the talk, where we focus on instability, is that there are multiple momentary equilibrium. That is to say, at any given state of the economy, a state is described by the state of the capital stock, and it's going to turn out in the first model by the value of land. Those are the two state variables. Given the state of the economy, there are multiple equilibrium in which demand is supplied. And it's going to turn out multiple equilibria that are consistent with dynamic rational expectations trajectories going forward infinitely far into the future. So that's not, that kind of multiplicity does not arise in standard models of infinite lifetime, but that's a special property of those models with separability of utility function. And so you have to understand that a lot of the properties of the models that you've been taught are very, very special. And so here we just change one assumption, as I say, the finite life. And I'll give you a intuition for why there's these multiple equilibrium in a moment. But a key idea in our paper is that endogenously, as the economy moves, that is to say, the capital stock increases or maybe decreases, or the price of land goes up or down, the number of momentary equilibrium can change endogenously. So you can go from a state, which we call phase, where there are 3, 5, in this model, there are always only 3, to 2 or 1 equilibrium. In more general versions, there may be many, many more equilibria. So the that is an important part of the analysis. Maybe let me give you an intuition why there can be multiple equilibrium. It's actually very simple. It's basically based on people's expectations. If they expect the interest rate, the return on their capital, is going to be very high when they make their investment. They say, what I need for my retirement is relatively little. I don't have to save a lot. And if they don't save a lot, given diminishing returns, what's going to be true? The return on capital is going to be very high. On the other hand, if they think the return on capital is going to be very low, in order to have enough savings for their retirement, they have to save a lot. And because they save a lot, the capital labor ratio is very high and the return on capital is very low. So these are multiple self-fulfilling equilibria. So they're all consistent with rational expectation. I should say one general remark. The OLG model has been around for about 75 years, and the OLG model with capital has been around for 65 years. And so when we began this, we thought, how could there be any new results in this area? I mean, with all these graduate students working so hard, trying to come up with, all kinds of crazy theses, how is it possible that we would be able to discover something new? Well, it turns out that there's lots of fertile ideas out there that people just haven't discovered. And these are actually remarkably simple. It doesn't require a lot of complicated mathematics. Well, you can see the idea that based on those expectations of either interest rates are high or low, you could have a boom or a bust. And so you could go from one equilibrium for a while, and then you could go back to another one, given the multiplicity of these equilibrium. So the economy can fluctuate all over the place. And so that's the basic, we call it a wobbly economy because it doesn't have any regular periodicity. It's not quite like chaotic dynamics. It really doesn't have any well-defined properties. But we're able to establish that these wobbles have to remain within certain bounds. And so even though we can't predict in any particular period where the economy is going to go, a lot of the time, there are periods where we can, but there are a lot of time we can't predict where the economy goes. We know that the wobbles have to stay within certain well-defined boundaries, and that when the price of land gets high enough, we know that it will break. And if it gets low enough, we know that there'll be a boom. So we can say a lot about these fluctuations. The interesting part of the dynamics, as I said, is that whether there are multiple equilibrium or one equilibrium depends on the state. And so the economy fluctuates from a world where there's a unique equilibrium to one where there are multiple equilibria back to one where, and it's sort of describing that process that we're going to talk about. So those of you who know some of the more heterodox literature know about what's called Minsky moments, where the economy is going up and then all of a sudden collapses. Minsky himself didn't have a rational expectations framework, and so we don't really capture fully the Minsky moment, which are really realizations that police were wrong. But this model is consistent with the spirit the missing moment. So this diagram shows you the kind of wobbles where you have this explosive phase, and then it reaches this critical point. You might say on this thing in the expansionary phase, you look at it and say it can't continue, and it doesn't continue. It reaches a certain level and it breaks and it falls, but it can't fall too far without being inconsistent with rational expectations, and then it starts going up. So what I want to emphasize, these wobbles are all perfectly consistent with rational expectations. And these define the boundaries. Very quickly, talk about there is two related literatures that some of you may be familiar with. There's a sunspot literature. This is different from the sunspot. The sunspot literature, for the most part, has multiple equilibrium all the time, and most of the sunspot literature doesn't have a state variable at the capital stop. And in our model, we have capital, and we don't rely on sunspots. We have multiple equilibria. And the other literature where this is really more in contrast is there's a rational expectation literature that is what most of you are familiar with, where everything is tied down by the transversality conditions. There are no fluctuations. And in our model, we have rational expectations not tied down, but not one person with the transversality condition. One of the very awkward things of the standard model, the first model that we're going to talk about is in the standard model, individuals have to think about the world going infinitely far into the future. And that's really crazy that anybody has the power to do that. And it only makes sense with representative agents, because it's only with representative agents where there's only one person really. And you can figure out what the transversality, whether the transversality condition is satisfied in the absence of a complete set of futures markets extending infinitely far into the future. But the representative agent model is not an economy. It doesn't even belong to be discussed in the social science. Because what is the social science about? Society. And Robinson Crusoe is not a society. So I hope you haven't had to study the representative agent model in any of your social science courses. And it's an economy without a market, because with one person, who are you trading with? Now, there have been some advances called heterogeneous agent, new Keynesian models, Hank models, and a whole variety. But those are even crazier, because in those models, there's a transversality condition. But to make sure that all the transversality conditions are satisfied, everybody has to have all the information about everybody else to find the fixed point of that equilibrium. What is the foundation of a market economy? Decentralization, where you don't have to know all that information. So they establish something that looks more realistic in one dimension by having heterogeneity, but they really go down the tubes. I guess American vernacular, I don't know what it's trying. It's terrible in another dimension, in that they assume that everybody has all this information, which is just countervails what market economics is supposed to be about. So one of the remarkable properties of our model is that agents only have to look one period ahead. And they only have to look one period ahead to make sure that the values of their expectations of behavior go within the constraints that are consistent with the rational expectations model. That there is some path going forward from that, which is consistent with rational expectations. They don't have to solve, they don't have to know which of the infinite number of paths the economy will take. All they have to know, if it's consistent with rational expectation, is that it lies within certain bounds that we're going to define. So we're able to get rid of that solving an infinite looking forward by telling people, as long as the key variables here, K and P, lie within certain bounds, you know that there's a rational expectations path going forward. And if you believe in rational expectations, you shouldn't, that's where the economy will evolve. I think, the point here is the nature of these fluctuations are, I've already said it, is the economy starts exploding, but then they know it can't go too far and then it has to implode. So that's really the basic intuition. And these diagrams here illustrate what goes on. This is a simple diagram in the case where there's no land, where you can solve for at any value of K of T, there is a rational expectations value of KT plus 1. But as I said, there's multiple momentary equilibrium within certain bounds. And the way you see, we've drawn the curve, you can see for a whole range of K of T, there are more than one K of T plus 1 that's consistent with the savings equal investment equation. And so we just drew one sample path there where you go from K of T to the next K of T plus 1, that becomes, you just go on like that. Now, what makes this more interesting with land is that you won't be able to understand that. The basic thing is, look at that previous curve, and when land does with the value of land holdings, the value of KT plus 1 that corresponds to at any K of T shifts. And it shifts as the land price goes up and down. Is that clear? So that curve that I described before keeps moving. Now you might say at that point you give up, but we didn't. And so that was the point of showing how complex things are. So I'm going to skip fairly quickly to describe the standard model. It's basically, as I said before, standard overlapping generations. They consume, they produce, firms produce. The only interesting thing is on I can't turn on that and see. The only interesting thing is now, different from the standard overlapping generations model, is people save a certain part of their income, which it depends on the interest rate, and they either invest it, hold it for their retirement in the form of capital goods or land. Okay? So it's just like the standard model where they used to hold land, capital goods. Now we hold capital goods and land. And how much gets absorbed by land depends on the price of land. So that's the crowding out. If the price of land is very high, that savings goes mostly into land and very little is held in capital. And that's the shifting of the curve in that previous diagram. So these two equations here, there are two equations. One is the savings equal investment equation. That's the second equation. And the first equation is the capital arbitrage equation. In a model perfect foresight, you return to holding capital has to be equal to the return to holding land. So that's the capital arbitrage, which standard equation. There's no uncertainty here. We could introduce uncertainty, but this is really the standard model. And then you can write the savings investment equation in the way that I've written at the top of here. And the interesting thing there is that the left-hand side, K over S, is not in general monotonic. And that's what gives you the multiplicity of equilibrium. That's the point I said. If people think the interest rate is going to be very low, they save a lot, and that leads to a low interest rate. So that's just a formal equation that gives you the multiplicity of equilibrium. And diagrammatically, you can solve it. You get a picture like that, and that says those are the give you the three values of for any given W of T, which gives you any value of K of T, which gives you a WT wage, that gives you the three of values of K of T plus 1. And as I say, that can arise in very simple models. We looked at constant elasticity, production and utility functions, and if the elasticity of substitution and the intertemporal elasticity of substitution are both low, it occurs, multiplicity. And so we looked in detail at one example where we can solve everything out. And so a lot of our analysis is based on the Leontief case, where there's Leontief savings. That is to say, you want to have a fixed amount of, you need to have a certain amount of consumption today and tomorrow. There's no substitution. And the Leontief production function. And the resulting curves look just like they did in the more general case, but they're lines. And with a big discontinuity at the point where you reach the full employment of capital. Okay. And that has the properties that I just said. So you go through the other one. The other critical equation is the capital arbitrage equation, where the rate of return on capital equals rate of return on land, and that gives you two regimes. Either there's a zero interest rate, capital surplus, or there's a capital shortage. So depending on which regime, you can figure out what happens to the dynamics of the price of land. So what's nice about this is either there are two values of the return to capital. It's either low or it's high, and that drives the dynamics of prices. So I should have stopped for a minute. So the whole model can be thought of as a mapping from K, the capital stock, and P, the price of land, at time T, into K of T plus 1 and P of T plus 1. But it's not a unique, it's a correspondence. And the mathematics of this is just exploring fully the nature of that correspondence and what it looks like, and all the possible infinite solutions. Yeah.
Start with my intuition. Function goes by large when the return to capital is high. Just so I understand, I've got models in my head where I'm trying this with the same period. What's happening? I'm sure you have the answer.
You're keeping it the same,
Right. And
and the way you do it is if you believe that the interest rate is going to be very low, then you're saving a lot. And low, the young people's consumption is low the first period and low the second period. And they're dividing that wage income, whatever that wage income was, between those two periods. And if they believe that the interest rate is going to be high, they take that same wage and they say, oh, I'm going to get a high return. So the first period, they consume a lot more. And the second period, they consume a lot more. So that's what's going on. You take your wage and you decide to consume a lot or a little, depending on your beliefs about what your return on your savings are going to be. And the way we've constructed it, those beliefs are always realized. So that's the rational expectations. The key property that keeps you within bounds is that the key property that we use a lot is that if you're on an explosive regime, prices going up, you want to make sure that you can switch into a regime where the price goes down. The real danger here is that the price is going up. There are multiple equilibria, but as I said, they're not always multiple equilibria. And if the price is going up and you go outside the range where there's multiple equilibria, then what happens? Then price goes up forever. But what happens then? That's inconsistent with rational expectations. So you know that the moment the price gets too high and it threatens to get outside the bounds, the only consistent path consistent with rational expectation is for there to be an implosion of the price. And the same thing on the downward path, when the real estate bubble breaks and the price starts to go down, going down and down, price is falling. But you know, if it falls too far, you again switch from multiple equilibria to a single equilibrium. But you know you can't do that, because if you have a single equilibrium, they'll continue to fall down, and that again will violate the boundary value. In that case, it's implosion. So that's what gives us the very well-defined bounds on the fluctuations. That's really the basic story of the fluctuations. In this model, the bounds in the Leontief model, it turns out there are only 6 parameters. And so you can characterize it. This is a lot of work that went into it. You can characterize all possible dynamic patterns as a function of all those 6 parameters, if you wanted to. It's a lot of work, let me say. But you can get a complete mapping of all the possible dynamic patterns. The most interesting is, I think, first point, you can prove very easily that there exist parameters for which the wobbly dynamics exists. You have to show that the patterns I described, the variable, they're just parameters for which this is true. Answer: yes, there are. Second one, there are parameters for which wobbly dynamics are the only possible dynamics. There's no steady state. So a lot of economists in OLG focused on steady state models. Here we can show there are values parameters for which there are no steady states. And then we have parameters for which there are both wobblies, dynamics, and steady states. There are parameters for which there are only steady states. So anyway, it's a rich set of parameters, a rich set of possible patterns of behavior. Should I take questions on this part before going on the next part? Or yeah.
Thank you for your sharing so far, but I'm sorry this is a stupid question. I'm still just an undergraduate, but I mean, so far, can't this simply be, can't the model be extrapolated to all forms of capital or all forms of assets for that matter? I mean, what makes land, a unique?
Yeah. There's a more general proposition that most of what goes on in standard DSG models, standard, doesn't work very well if you introduce more than one capital. But there's a particular property of here that we're interested in. Land is a non-produced asset, and it is the non-produced property of asset, which is important, not so much for this model, where you can get, but for models that we eventually want to get to, which involve unemployment. So this is a stepping stone to that. And the reason why that's true is when we have an economic downturn, what you worry about is people wanting to hold non-produced assets rather than produced assets. And that means the demand for produced assets goes down, and that gives rise to a recession. So,
but to clarify, can't you just do land reclamation? I mean, some countries in the world have been, like in Singapore.
oh yeah, yes, but not in the time scale. And no, so yes, there are things you can do about, but this is really an exercise in pure theory, where we're taking the value of land, the quantity of land is fixed. The value of land is changing. Yeah.
So if you go back to this slide with the is the wage income here exhaustion?
No, it's a function of the capital stock at time t. That's how you go the mapping. You have the K of t that gives you the wage, and your expectation of the return on capital, which is a function of K of t plus 1, which is an endogenous variable, is what determines K of t plus 1. So that is what actually gives you. But knowing to get to K of t plus 1, you have to know how much land there is, the value of the land, and that gives you S times W gives you your savings. To get to how much capital you have to subtract out land holdings. Yeah.
Just to clarify my understanding. To what extent do you see the role of government?
Oh, yeah. I haven't had time to talk. No, that's a really good point, and it's not in the slides, so I'm not going to come to it. So, but let me answer that. We can show that government intervention can stabilize the economy, but it's a much more complicated form of intervention. That capital gains taxes can actually make this more volatile in the rational expectations. I don't think in the real world. So, but in this model, there are forms of monetary and fiscal intervention that can stabilize it. But the economy without government intervention is very volatile, as we've seen. Yeah, let me go on to the one more part that is a little bit. One of the things I wanted to say, we have a model where you have the dividend on land in the first model was fixed, But if you have the dividend on land, the rent land, a function of the allocation of labor or capital to land, you can go very easily from 3 to momentary equilibrium to 5. You get even more volatility. So I mean, only if and the point of, and we've done variants of the model where you have more than one group, and I'm going to come to that in a second, where you get even more momentary equilibrium. So the point we're making is the result that you've learned about the unique momentary equilibrium is really a property of very strong assumptions like representativation. And we haven't worked hard to get multiple momentary equilibrium. This is not struggling. This is just, you write down a natural model and you get multiple momentary equilibrium. Same thing you add real estate, same thing you add distribution within a generation, and you get these very, very large fluctuations. So the back one, okay. So the second part of this is focused on the crowding out effect and on the growth effect. We wanted to argue that real estate is really bad for the economy. And I noticed when I was walking to Newnham, where we had the conference, I walked by the Department of Land Economy, which was there when I was a graduate student in Cambridge in 1965, and it was there, and that was where the young property people of your dukes and your learned how to manage their estates and how they could get a degree without actually knowing anything. But I think it's now a serious discipline. But that was just historic. I can tell it's historical.
Careful, Joe, we have faculty from Atlantic.
Anyway, that was it. That was a long time ago. The second part of this, which I have about 5 minutes to do, so I'll do very quickly. Ask the question about if you have two groups. This follows the kind of spirit of Kiyotaki and Moore. You have two groups. You have one, and we're trying to introduce a financial friction to make the model more realistic. And the nature of the financial friction is you have one group, which are ordinary people who need to save for their retirement, the workers. And you have the other group, the entrepreneurs, who are the only people who have good projects. And basically the savers, the entrepreneurs, take all their savings and put it into their projects. But their projects are somewhat risky, although we don't model that risk. And so they can borrow. The only people they can borrow from are the ordinary workers, but they need to put collateral up to borrow. And so the collateral expands how much they can borrow, but limits it at the same time. The value of the collateral limits how much they can borrow. So that's the first idea, introducing a simple form of financial friction. And the second idea was to put in a kind of learning by doing. That the growth, endogenous growth, so that the growth in the main sector of the economy, the productive sector, not the lagging sector, the productive sector of the economy was a function of the size, the value of K. It's a standard AK model. So the more K, there's an externality. There's a modeling, but it's a standard modeling problems. And what you get out of that, let me give the just the main results of that. We have three main results. The first is the credit expansions to the real sector that occur with the relaxation of the real estate financing. That means lowering the collateral requirement, decreased productivity of the economy, lowering economic growth. And the reason is that the crowding out, the fact that you have more collateral value to land means that more money goes into land. It increases the value, the value of land as a collateralized asset goes up. And that means that with the price of land going up, it crowds out productive investment. And that lower level productive investment has a follow-on effect in the rate of growth of the economy. And the second result is so long as the collateral value of land is greater than that of capital, actually low interest rate policies encourage credit expansion to the real estate sector instead of credit expansion to the capital intensive sector or to the manufacturing sector, really leading to reduced long-term economic growth. So this is totally consistent with what happened in 2003. We lowered the interest rate, and you might have said, with that lower interest rate, we ought to have a production boom. The cost of borrowing for manufacturing went down, for productive investment. But given the relative collateral requirements, it led instead to an increase in the real estate bubble that crowded out real investment and led to lower economic growth. Yeah.
I agree with both the descriptive and the normative direction in which you go. Just wonder why it is necessarily the case that increasing investment in land wouldn't lead to higher returns. If it was agriculture, that could be productive. So
it could be. Yeah.
That means it's not allowed to be productive.
Yeah, we've assumed that, you're right. Now, there's a good reason for that. Agriculture now is such a small part of the economy. Its technology is very, very special. And the part of agriculture that has had most innovation are things like machinery, which are really manufacturing and not agriculture. They're manufactured inputs into agriculture. There's some agricultural practices in developing countries that's not true, but more generally, the reason to focus on manufacturing as a source of innovation is that the size of the units in manufacturing are large, and because they are large, the returns to R&D and the returns to learning can be internalized more, and therefore there's more of an incentive to do more R&D, and that spills over. So there's a whole literature that.
No, like I say, in terms of
Yeah,
stories in the UK, just goes.
Yeah. Yeah. So that I mean, as I say, the model is consistent with what would actually happens, and that this provides a rational expectations explanation. Now, my own view is that most of what happened in the run-up to the financial crisis cannot be described by rational expectations. It was fraud and stupidity combined since the doctrine in the economics profession is you have to use rational expectations, I thought it would be useful to show that even within that doctrine, you have counterproductive, that low interest rates will be counterproductive, particularly if the collateral requirement, the collateral value of land is greater than manufacturing. And I should say why that's a natural assumption. The reason it's a natural assumption is collateral values of homogeneous assets tend to be higher than a very heterogeneous assets. So if you make a machine, the machine is of value only mainly to the particular producer. It's going to take you a lot of money to transport it, to reconvert it to another use. It's a very, very specific form of capital. Land is more malleable in a sense. And that greater malleability, transferability makes it have greater collateral value. So it is not a surprise that most economies take land as the more collateralizable asset. And that means when you lower interest rates, the collateralizable value goes up more, and there's more crowding out. Yeah.
I have a question and a request.
Sure.
So the question is, what can governments do? What's your view on land value tax in terms of redressing the balance between investment in land and investment? And the request is, please can you send that to Andrew Bailey? I don't think he understands anything about it.
What?
If you send that to Andrew Bailey, because I don't think he understands.
Yes, a land tax in general is a good thing. More, but let me say that the phenomena that we have here of things going up and down arise even in what we call pure bubbles, where there's 100% tax on land rent, and land just becomes an asset. So
Land value picks up and reduces basically.
yeah, no, and the problem, yeah, and that's what I meant. This is a result I don't like, and particularly where I think rational expectations is giving you a misguided view. But the problem with taxing capital gains in this model, where you already have land there, you're not getting rid of land, it's still there, and you can't stop people from having stored value, is that the arbitrage equation is such that if you tax the gain by 50%, the equilibrium condition requires the increase in the price to be twice as large. And so it creates more volatility. So the volatility here is endogenous. And that's, and as I say, it's hard to wrap your mind around that, because most of us have models in our mind where prices are related to fundamental values. And here the price is just a bubble price. And even when there is some fundamental value with a dividend, there's a bubble element in it. And so that's why, take the real case of what we call pure bubble, where there's no intrinsic value. when you tax the return, prices become more volatile by the arbitrage equation. And it's reason. So I'm very committed to a strong capital gains tax. So I said, I don't like this result. But
Regulation.
what?
Regulation.
Yeah, that would be regulation. I believe strongly that this goes back, it's financial, and we talk about financial regulation. When you lower the interest rate, stopping all that capital going into real estate. So many countries have had regulation that says that lending should go in one way or another. And particularly in developing countries, they've had it. And it's all part of neoliberal ideology that markets on their own are efficient and stable. And part of the reason I wrote the first part is that markets on their own are not stable. And that government intervention can enhance stability. Now, the thing that we're really interested in is instability of unemployment. We haven't built that into the model. This is a fully neoclassical model, and we get an enormous amount of volatility and a loss of welfare. But we don't have the most important source of loss of welfare, which is unemployment. Yeah.
Do you have any ideas how to stop all that capital in real estate?
Well, the point we made, a regulation of lending.
It's much easier for banks to lend to real estate.
Yeah. Yeah, you just tell it. It's called directed lending. So, what you?
They don't have to make provisions
When
they lend houses the same.
Yeah, you can do it in a number of ways. You can say no more than a certain fraction of your portfolio can be in real estate lending. There'll be some circumvention at the edge. They'll call it one thing versus another, but it's and the way I think you say at least so much should go for productive lending. So
it's interesting. I was having lunch with a senior banker the other day, and he was making the point in the UK, the regulation on pension funds is really the opposite. It's saying it absolutely requires them to invest in real estate, but supposedly risk management processes, but that's the opposite of what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, and that exacerbates these real estate. Yeah.
One point study mine, data shows that the efficiency level of capital is most positive, which indicates the abundance. So, but according to your result here, capital could be sparse, and the other thing is related to the land speculation. So empirically, that's quite conclusive.
Well, let me say, the first model is we really intended it a very theoretical model. The second model, the one we're talking about right now, has a important property that I was just going to come to, I think, and that is a lot of our simple models don't distinguish between the safe rate of return, which is on government bonds, and return on productive capital. And that's because in a frictionless market, the two would be the same. And the way we've constructed this model is that there are financial frictions. I mean, that's what, yeah. And so the workers save and they get a very low return. That's the T-bill rate. And that's been 1%, 1.5%. But the entrepreneurs are getting a much higher return on their capital. They would like to borrow more, but they can't. And you can reformulate this in ways that you can say the collateral requirement is a borrowing limit that's related to the risk associated with the probability distribution of the capital asset, and that the workers have a high degree of risk aversion, so they won't lend more than a certain fraction of the mean value of the asset. So you can move away from the collateral requirements to a willingness to accept risk perspective. So there are various ways of doing it. But the point I want to make is that if you have different degrees of risk aversion by the workers and their entrepreneurs and these kinds of capital requirements, the entrepreneurs are getting a high return on their capital. They would like to invest more and they can't. And so this model gets a result that's really important for both interpreting the data and for macroeconomic analysis, that there's a big gap between the interest rate and the productive return on capital. So you can go. You're not an insult.
Those who have college meetings are allowed to meet at the outside stage.
So, the reason that's important, by the way, is that the current and persistent low value of the observed interest rate, which has been 1.5% the last few years, minus 1%, would suggest that the economy has dynamic inefficiency. If you have R less than G, the economy is dynamically inefficient. So those low rates of interest are less than the growth rate of the economy. But our model yields the result that that's not the relevant one for productive returns. And so our model has productive efficiency. Those firms are making investment are getting high returns in the real sector. And the evidence is actually pretty strong on that. The return on real investment in the United States, at least, I don't know what it is in England, but in the United States, real return on productive investments around 7% real. So it significantly exceeds the growth rate. So this evidence, of both high rates of return and high opportunities, if we could get capital to flow more easily across from savers to investors.
Joe, your conclusions in relation to the rational increment model, rational expectations model, seeing if you move to a situation in which the expectations of investors are irrational in the sense that they believe that the returns on real estate are in fact higher than they actually are, perhaps with the duration cycles much longer, which may be the case in this country. That exacerbates or makes them more extreme in terms of the starving out effect.
I think so. I mean, as I say, my intuition, I haven't thought it all through, is that once you include irrational optimism, that it makes all the volatility even worse, and especially in real estate. So people get very optimistic about real estate, and they invest even less in capital. Yeah.
Sorry if I'm missing something, but so say we expand capital to, expand credit to manufacturing and tighten credit in the real estate industry. Might this exacerbate inequalities, especially in places where there's homelessness issue? I mean, presumably it's harder to get a home, and then home capital might get.
No, I think it would actually. I mean, we haven't focused on the implications of all this for inequality. But one of the problems is that when you have a low interest rate policy in the current framework, it contributes to the real estate bubble, and those high real estate prices price out low-income individuals out of the housing market and exacerbate the problem of homelessness. So, but we haven't focused on, as I say, we only have one group in our first model and two groups in our second model. And these are all, happy workers willing to slave for very low wages. Yeah.
Do you think it would be possible to expand this model to country by replacing land with grain?
We have a version where we have monetary policy, money, and everything is very, very similar. And in fact, as I say, some of the standard models have actually focused on the non-produced asset being money, and with results virtually identical. There's a interesting question in open economy models where an asset that people might hold is foreign exchange in dollars, and that would, I think, have similar results, but with one other interesting dimension of how it affects the foreign exchange rate. And so, I mean, that's a really interesting direction to extend the model into an open economy where the asset that is being held is. Yeah, well, I think that's right, and there's a lot of instability in the foreign exchange dynamics. That should be able one should be able to do it and get think about it, not the value of the dollar is determined by Washington, but the value of your exchange rate relative to the dollar as what's fluctuating. Okay. Yeah.
Just curious, what do you think the implication of this on the dual mandate? Do you think this should be?
There are a couple of implications, and I wish I had a couple more hours to go through this, because we talked a little bit about this, and one of our problems is we have not been very good at getting our talk down to 45 minutes or half an hour. So I apologize, but one of the general implications is that you can't separate monetary policy, interest rate policy, from financial policy. That you want to regulate where financial flows go. And another implication is that something that Alan Greenspan hinted at in a speech he gave in December 1996, where it was the myths of the Japanese breaking of the bubble. And he talked about irrational exuberance. So he didn't believe in rational expectations, but he observed that the monetary policy was having a very big effect on asset prices. And then he went on. I was at this beginning. It was famous irrational exuberance, and I was there, and I was okay. Now tell us to say it, and he couldn't do it. He said, "We still have to focus on commodity price inflation, even though we were ruining the economy." And he didn't say the last part. So the point is, I think the point is macroeconomic stability is related to asset prices. And you can't separate out stability from looking at asset prices. And, you know, I've said that in some of my other work. And financial policy, like collateral requirements, margin requirements, affect how the flow of funds, where the flow of funds are going, and whether they're going into productive assets and therefore stimulating the economy, or into real estate and therefore just creating a bubble that will eventually break. And this actually speaks to the point. If you're going to create a bubble that's eventually going to break, that's not good for the economy. And the irrational exuberance it really makes that argument, I think, more compelling than even this model does.
Should there be a revision to the core inflation numbers?
No, I haven't thought about how to operationalize this. I think really that, you know, if you think about operationalizing it really is saying, can we identify changes in asset values that are unsustainable and likely lead to a crisis? So in our paper, we talk about early warning indicators, of ways that you can look at asset prices that would be indicative of a bubble. And, you know, one of the things, you know, people say, well, you won't know for certain. But the point about monetary policy, you never know for certain. So the degree of uncertainty here is no worse than any other degree of uncertainty. So I think we talk about in our paper the early warning indicators and how central banks could look at this as signs of a bubble.
Yeah, I'm still interested in the heterogeneity effect on different population. You mentioned in the model 1, you consider only Y group, to 2 group. It's possible to extend this to like heterogeneous effect conditional like subgroup.
Oh yeah, I mean, we wanted to show you can get such complex dynamics in the simplest possible model. We've actually begun working on models with more heterogeneity in agents.
Yeah.
And it turns out that it's very easy to get an order of magnitude more multiplicity of equilibria. So it becomes much more intractable. But the basic insights are the same. But it is really very easy to go, you know. So even in the simplest model, the first model, you go with 2 groups, you can go from 3 equilibria to 9 equilibria. So it gets much richer. And then you can go variation in the number of equilibria. The bounds get bigger. The possible, you know, oscillations get wider and more unpredictable.
Yeah, I'm from statistics background, so I care about how they fit with the data. So
Yeah.
Actually, just very related to, I want to ask you about the heterogeneous agents that you choose for research, which you only consider about the old and young. And how about if you are introducing, you know, other different kinds of heterogeneous agents, like they have different beliefs or something like that? Will this can there be back in the equilibrium?
Yeah, well, so 2 aspects of that. This particular model, we're really emphasizing heterogeneity. We don't want to have heterogeneous beliefs because we want to have rational expectations. One of the most unattractive aspects of rational expectations is that everybody has the same beliefs. We know that that's not true. So, and you know, that when I talk about why that's such a bad model of the economy, it partly reflects all the evidence that people do have different beliefs. And the existence of heterogeneous beliefs has some very profound consequences. If, for instance, people will engage in bets with each other, and those bets themselves are a major source of volatility in the economy. The outstanding book of bets. And the bets are often implicit in holdings of debt and equity. They're not just formal bets, but they're implicit bets that are reflected in portfolio holdings. So that is a right direction, but we didn't want to go here because we want to keep within, we don't want anybody to say, well, once you get out of rational expectations, anything can happen. We wanted to point out that within rational expectations, it is only the assumption of infinite life that makes the world simple. And there is ample empirical evidence against the hypothesis that people live infinitely long. So that was the thrust. Now, other forms of heterogeneity, as I mentioned, like income, are important. And one of the reasons that there's a, makes some sense of this two-group workers and entrepreneurs is another way of interpreting that is that workers have low income. Because they have low income, they have high degrees of risk aversion. And there's another group of people with higher income who may have some wage income, but that's not really the key point, because they have high income or are very productive workers with us. They're less risk averse, and therefore they're able to undertake entrepreneurial activities with high returns. And so you think about this not in terms of exogenous groups with entrepreneurship or without, but thinking of it as a much more endogenous function of the wealth distribution.
You're going to lose your book if you ask one more. I think I'm going to stop because I know you have a busy schedule this evening. So if you don't mind, just huge thanks for coming. So I'm going to give out the book. I'm going to give. So I like all the regular. You guys have to fight for it.
Oh, there was us too.
Yeah, the first question, then follow up with it. Brilliant. Thank you very much, guys, and thanks, Joe, again for coming.